You spent 8 years building an empire to protect me, and you didn't even notice when I walked right through your front door.
You've known this whole time?
I told you, I was never waiting to be rescued.
But boss, I said drop them! How long? How long have you had that scar?
1:47 a.m. Penthouse, 31st floor, the Meridian Grand. Thomas Reed is on the floor, right hand curled against his chest. 3 feet to his left, a suppressed pistol lies where it fell. No one reaching for it, no one's hands on it. The room smells of cedar and something colder. An evening that went wrong in ways he didn't anticipate. Lyric Washington is standing in the center of the room. Her carbon fiber cane is extended. The titanium tip catches the city light filtering through the glass behind her. Manhattan at 1:47 a.m., still lit, still indifferent, quietly magnificent. She cannot see Thomas looking up at her from the floor. She cannot see the city framing her silhouette in gold. She cannot see any of it. She doesn't need to. My father spent 12 years composing 12 songs. Her voice is the same voice that fills the Velvet Lounge 6 nights a week. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice a room goes quiet for. You spent 8 months selling his work to the man who killed him, and you thought I had been carrying all of it without understanding a single note of what it meant. A silence. The kind that lands, I have known exactly what I was carrying since I was 14. The mahogany door opens. Han Song-jin stands in the frame, jacket open, breathing harder than he ever allows in front of other people. His eyes move to Thomas, then to Lyric. Then he stops. In 8 years, he had told himself one story about who she was. He was wrong about every word of it. If you already know what's hidden inside those 12 songs, drop Washington's site in the comments right now. This story is just beginning. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. We want to know. What city are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Drop it below. Comment night shift if you'd have stood your ground the same way she did. The last note of the evening always felt like exhaling. Lyric Washington stood in the wings of the Velvet Lounge for exactly 47 seconds after the applause ended. Long enough for the room to settle, not long enough to undo anything the music had built. 6 nights a week, 38 weeks a year, she played this venue. She knew the particular quality of its silence when the house lights came up. She knew the sound of champagne flutes being carried back to the bar, the soft mechanical groan of the piano lid being lowered, the shift in air pressure when the rear exit door opened, and the cold of 53rd Street slipped in behind some couple leaving early. She knew this room the way she knew her own hands. What she didn't know was that 11 floors above her, someone had just said her name to a man who didn't need to hear it twice. In the green room backst. Zoe was asleep in the velvet armchair, cheek pressed against the headrest, one wireless earbud still in, the other dangling at her elbow. Her sketchbook lay open across her knees. A half-finished drawing of what appeared to be an elephant in a very serious business suit. The pencil was still in her hand. Just 1 hour, Lyric. Her brother Marcus had called at 2 in the afternoon, voice carrying the particular guilt of someone already moving toward the door. The sitter canceled. I have the Harlem meeting. A pause. 1 hour. I promise. 1 hour had become 3.5. Lyric crouched beside the armchair and lifted Zoe carefully against her chest. The girl stirred but didn't wake, just turned her cheek against Lyric's shoulder and released the long, boneless exhale of a child who trusts completely. The sketchbook began to slide. Lyric reached back by instinct, caught the spine before it hit the floor, tucked it under her arm. 6 years of being this child's person had sharpened reflexes she hadn't known she was building. She picked up her cane and her instrument bag and moved toward the exit. Outside, Manhattan had changed the terms. The rain arrived at 10:47 with no warning. Not the slow curtain of a proper October storm, but something sudden and sideways, the kind that turned 53rd Street into a wall of sound. Water on glass, horns, the specific percussion of 100 pairs of hurrying feet on wet pavement. Lyric stood in the service corridor and listened. She could hear the lobby entrance, 2 hallways, Alex. 2 ahead, the acoustic shift of high ceilings and polished marble. The revolving door cycling open and shut every few seconds. She could track 7th Avenue through the building glass as a distant, muffled roar. She built her route from these sounds the way another person might use signage. The Meridian Grand was 12 years old. Lyric had been navigating it for 6 of them. She knew its logic. The turn after the floral alcove on 13, the 3-step descent near the east elevators, the exact place where the carpet runner ended and bare stone began. She had built this building in her mind, layer by layer, and she trusted the map completely. But tonight there was construction on 14. She registered the temporary partition before she walked into it, the smell of raw drywall compound, the change in airflow where a corridor had been sealed and rerouted. She stopped, recalculated, took the next right instead of left, tracking the hum of the ventilation system toward what she estimated was the secondary elevator bank on the floor above. 7 steps. She pressed open the door at the end of the corridor. The air was wrong immediately. Not dangerous. She had enough training to separate those two things before anything else registered. Alec, but wrong. The temperature was lower than the hallway by at least 2 degrees. The smell had changed. Sandalwood, black pepper, and underneath both of them something faintly metallic. The particular combination of expensive and tense that she'd learned to recognize without being able to name exactly when she'd learned it. The acoustics said, large room, high ceiling, hard surfaces, and at least 5 people who had not been speaking when she entered. They weren't speaking now either. Lyric stopped in the doorway. Zoe's weight shifted against her shoulder. Then, the sound she recognized without wanting to, the hard mechanical double click of weapons clearing their holsters. Not one, several, close. Zoe opened her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't tighten or flinch or make any of the sounds a child makes when startled awake in a strange place. She looked around the room the way she looked at everything. Steadily, systematically, with the unhurried interest of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of things she didn't understand. Several men. Minimal light except for the pale glow of a laptop screen on the far table, but one figure standing apart from the rest, positioned at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his back to the room. She yawned. Then she looked at the man by the windows. The only one who hadn't moved, the only one whose hands weren't raised, and said in the same clear, conversational tone she used for all observations she found worth making, "Why does it smell like anger in here?" The room didn't move. The sound of a 6-year-old asking a sincere question inside a space full of drawn weapons is not a sound anyone prepares for. It doesn't fit any protocol. It doesn't match any threat assessment. It simply lands, specific and guileless, and completely unanswerable. And for a moment, the entire room became something other than what it had been 5 seconds before. The man at the windows turned around. Han Songjin had a face trained by years of practice to give nothing away. He looked at the woman standing in the doorway, posture still, weight balanced, one hand on her cane, and the other steady at the child's back. He looked at the child on her shoulder, who was now studying the room with patient, scientific interest. Then his eyes moved to the right side of her neck, below her ear, small, a crescent scar, pale against dark skin, the shape left by something. Dark skin, the shape by something that had once been much worse, something that had been carefully and expensively reduced, not removed. His father had described this scar to him in a conversation held in a private room 12 years ago. His father had not been able to finish that conversation without stopping twice. His father, who had never once wept in front of another person in his life, had wept during it. Lower the guns. He said it once. No one asked him to say it again. No one moved for 3 full seconds. Not because they misheard the order. Not because they were uncertain about who had given it. Because they were trying to understand what had just happened to the man who gave it. The sound that followed Jin's order was the sound of a room remembering how to breathe. Weapons returned to holsters one by one. Lyric tracked each click, counted them, noted direction and sequence. 5 weapons. 5 people other than the man who had spoken. She filed all of it the way she filed everything in an unfamiliar space, not for comfort, but for information. She adjusted Zoe's weight against her shoulder and spoke. "My name is Lyric Washington. A beat, clean and unrushed. I perform downstairs 6 nights a week. The renovation on 14 sent me the wrong direction. This is my niece. A pause. We would like to leave. No apology beyond what the situation required. No tremor in her voice. No upward inflection at the end of sentences that turned statements into requests. Just the facts, arranged in order, offered to whoever in this room had the authority to act on them. She heard someone exhale near the doorway, quiet, through the nose. She would learn later that his name was Jason Park, and that very few things had surprised him in the past 11 years. He was surprised by this. She didn't hear the man at the center of the room make any sound at all. Take them to the anteroom. His voice came from the same position as before, low, unhurried, the voice of someone who did not need projection to fill a space. Stay with them. Don't touch anything of hers. A door opened to her left. A man named Thomas Reed identified himself in a tone careful to sound neutral. She noted his voice the way she noted the rest of it. Filed, kept, cross-referenced against nothing yet. She followed the direction of his footsteps into the next room, with Zoe still against her chest. The anteroom was smaller. The carpet underfoot was shorter pile, slightly cooler, Balak. A window on the eastern wall. She could hear a faint whistle of air at the frame's edge, and beyond it the rain still falling 22 floors below. Her cane found the leg of a sofa, a side table. One person stationed near the door, breathing at the measured rate of someone trying to appear relaxed. Lyric sat down and did not look for a way out. Instead, she listened. The wall between the anteroom and the main suite was not soundproof. She caught fragments. A phone call, a name she didn't recognize, the word Jersey repeated twice with increasing weight. She could hear the specific silence of a room waiting for a decision to be made. She had grown up in a world of incomplete sound, which meant she had grown up learning to fill in the spaces, to reconstruct whole sentences from the words she could reach and the shape of those. She couldn't. It was not different from music. A rest told you as much as a note, sometimes more. Then she heard something she stopped filling in and simply held. Sio's intermediary made contact. Jason's voice came through the wall, careful and flat, full withdrawal from Jersey, all contested roots, in exchange for the woman and whatever she's carrying. A beat, 24 hours to confirm. Silence on the other side of the wall, not the silence of hesitation. Shorter than that, more absolute, no. Boss, the number's on Jersey. I said no. The conversation moved on as though the question had never been asked. Lyric sat with that exchange for a moment. She hadn't heard the full content of the offer. She didn't need to. The phrase whatever she's carrying told her enough about her own position in this room. What she held onto instead was the sound before his answer. Less than 3 seconds of silence. Not a man calculating. A man who had finished calculating long before the question arrived and was now selecting the shortest available word. She filed it. She didn't have a category for it yet. 20 minutes later, the door opened. Han Song-jin walked in and sat down across from her, not at the far end of the room, not standing over her, directly across at a distance that was neither close nor pointedly far. Zoe had fallen back to sleep, face turned into Lyric's arm, pencil still loosely in her fist. He didn't speak immediately. She gave him the silence without resistance. Do you know who your father was, Miss Washington? The question was quiet, specific. The kind of question that already knows it is dismantling something. James Washington, her voice was level. Music teacher, District 4, Queens, died 18 years ago. Car accident, I-95 northbound. A pause. The police report said black ice. There was no ice. She had known this for years in the way you know things you cannot prove and cannot stop knowing. Hearing someone state it plainly, without preamble, without softening it city first, was different from knowing it. How do you know who I am? She said. You reacted the moment I walked in. Before I said a word, he was quiet for a moment. My father described your scar to me, the crescent below your right ear. No rush in his voice, no performance of difficulty. He arranged for a surgeon to reduce it 3 months after the accident. A pause. He said a girl shouldn't have to see that reminder every morning. Lyric didn't speak. He told me he cried when he signed the paperwork. A breath. My father didn't cry in front of people. In his entire life, I witnessed it once. That was the time. My aunt told me it faded on its own, Lyric said finally. It was the least he could do. The words were plain, not asking to be absolved. He knew that. The room held the particular quiet of something being slowly absorbed. The way water moves into dry ground that has been waiting a long time. Then Zoe's voice arrived from where she had been not quite sleeping against Lyric's side, in the unhesitating tone of someone who had been listening long enough to have formed an opinion. You have a tired face. She was looking at Jin, directly, pencil poised above her sketchbook. Not sleepy tired, the other kind. Jin looked at her. Go back to sleep, Zoe. I wasn't actually asleep. She studied him a moment longer with the thoroughness of someone taking an inventory. And that kind of tired doesn't get better from sleeping anyway. She returned the pencil to the page. The matter, as far as she was concerned, was closed. Jin said nothing. Lyric said nothing. Outside, the rain had shifted. The violence of an hour ago settling into something that simply fell steadily against the glass. She couldn't see his face. But she had spent 18 years learning that you didn't need to. Lies had a sound. A specific hesitation before the word that carried the most weight. A tightening in the chest that changed how air moved through the throat. He had not lied once since walking into this room. That was almost harder to sit with than if he had. The penthouse on the 31st floor was quieter than the street, but never entirely silent. Lyric had learned this by the second morning. The ventilation cycling at 6-minute intervals, the creak of the service elevator door, 2 corridors east. Jason Park's voice through the wall when he was on the phone. She built the 31st floor the way she had built the Meridian Grand's lower levels. From the sounds a building makes when it thinks no one is listening. Victor Seo had confirmed her location. Jin told her without preambles and without softening it. 3 vehicles stationed around the hotel's perimeter, 2 more outside her apartment on the Lower East Side. You can leave? Jin said. I won't stop you. But I want you to understand what leaving means tonight. She didn't leave. She hadn't finished building the map. It was late afternoon when Jin told her the rest of it. They were in the main room. Zoe at the low table with her sketchbook, the city spread below through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Jin sat across from Lyric and told her about her father the way you tell someone a thing you've been holding for a long time. Carefully, from the beginning, without embellishment. James Washington had not only been a community liaison, he had been for 9 quiet years the most careful witness to Victor Seo's financial operations that Seo had never known existed. He collected nothing dramatic. No photographs, no confessions, only numbers, account structures, routing sequences, shell company formations, gathered one fragment at a time, recorded in the only format he trusted could never be found. Music. He built 12 original compositions, Jin said. Each one encodes a sequence of numbers inside its harmonic structure. He paused. Interval distances between notes, mapped to digits. He spent years teaching you to hear it. Lyric was very still. You've been carrying his evidence for 18 years. A pause. Every time you performed those songs, you were holding something he died protecting. The room held that sentence for a long moment. Then, Lyric reached out and found the edge of the acoustic guitar on the low table beside her. She didn't ask. She set it across her knees, located the neck by touch, placed her fingers on the 4th fret. 8 notes, slowly, with absolute precision. The bridge of the 4th piece in the Washington suite, the one her father called after the rain. She stopped. This phrase. Her voice was the same voice she used for everything, level, unhurried. The way he voiced it. She pressed the phrase again, slower. 3rd, sharp 7, flat 9, root. He used that voicing when he wanted me to listen beyond the melody. 3 more notes, deliberate, the distance between them. She set her palm flat against the strings and stopped their sound. Minor 3rd is 3, major 3rd is 4, tritone is 6. A beat. Map the intervals and you get a 6-digit string. She let the strings go quiet. He wrote 12 songs, 12 strings. I memorized everyone before I was 15. A pause. I thought it was music theory. Across the room, Jason had moved to the laptop without being asked. His fingers moved over the keys. He stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at Jin. He nodded once. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it. Not threat assessment, not decision. The silence of a room that has understood something it cannot take back. Jin looked at her, posture unchanged, as though she had simply demonstrated a scale. He looked at her the way you look at something when the story you have been telling yourself turns out to have been the wrong story entirely. His father had asked him to watch over a girl who played music. He had not mentioned what she was carrying inside it. Jason excused himself to run the remaining sequences. The room quieted. Lyric spoke first, not to fill the silence, but because she had heard something in the way Jin said. My father asked me that only a certain kind of person says. The kind who learned the past tense before they were ready to. Your father, she said. He's gone. It wasn't a question. 6 years ago. His voice didn't change in register. Heart failure. That's what the certificate says. A pause, brief and controlled. CO had been pressuring him for 2 years before that. There are kinds of damage that don't appear on certificates. Lyric didn't say she was sorry. She had learned long ago that I'm sorry was what people offered when they had nothing more accurate. She said nothing for a moment. Then, we're both here because of the same man. Yes, and the same man's son. Jin didn't answer. He didn't look away either. Tack. An hour later, Zoe migrated from her sketchbook to the window, which was where she always ended up. Eventually. Jin was standing there. She climbed onto the low bench beside him without asking and looked out at what he was looking at. 31 floors below, Manhattan moved the way it always moved, without pausing for anyone. 10 full seconds of quiet. For Zoe, this was unusual. Do you have friends? I have people who work for me. That's not the same thing. She studied the skyline. D. Lyric says lonely people know everyone's name, but nobody knows theirs. A small pause. Do people know your name? Too many people know my name. She thought about this with visible seriousness. That sounds like the loneliest kind. She climbed down from the bench and returned to her sketchbook as someone who considers the subject closed. Jin remained at the window. Across the room, Lyric sat with the guitar across her knees, not playing. She had heard every word. She had also heard the silence before his answer. The same quality as the one before no through the anteroom wall the night before. She was beginning to understand that his silences were where he kept the things he didn't say. Later, Zoe had fallen asleep at the table, and the ventilation had cycled twice more. Jin crossed the room to the thermostat without comment. She had been cold since early evening. She hadn't shifted or made any sound about it at all. He adjusted the temperature. He returned to his chair. She didn't ask how he had noticed. He didn't offer an explanation. The room grew warmer. Outside the glass, Manhattan continued its particular brightness. A city that has never needed to explain itself to anyone. He had spent 8 years telling himself this was obligation. A debt. A promise made 6 years ago. Alec, he had built the whole architecture of it on that foundation, and it had held until this afternoon. Until he watched her map 9 years of her father's grief into 6-digit strings from memory. Without notes, without hesitation, with nothing except the certainty of someone who had been carrying something important for a very long time and had never once considered putting it down. Obligation didn't feel like this. He didn't have a word for what this felt like. That bothered him considerably more than the CEO situation. The trap had been elegant in its simplicity. Lyric heard the call come in at 11:14 p.m. The change in Jason Park's cadence through the wall. The words confirmed and Brooklyn and now. She heard Jin's silence before his response. She heard the particular quality of a decision being made under time pressure. She heard him stop at the door. 30 minutes. His voice was even. Thomas. Nothing happens to them. Thomas Reed answered from his position near the entrance. 2 seconds before he spoke, his breathing had changed. Not the slow regulation of someone accepting a routine order. The shorter, elevated rhythm of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. Understood, boss! Lyric heard that beat. She filed it. The door closed. Jin and Jason were gone. She did not move immediately. She sat with the guitar across her knees and she listened. The room was different without Jin in it. She had mapped him over 2 days, his weight on the floor, the specific displacement of air when he moved through a space, the almost inaudible sound of his breathing when he was thinking. The room without him had a different quality, lighter, in the way a room gets lighter when the heaviest thing in it has left. Thomas Reed was breathing at the wrong rate. Not the measured calm of a guard at his post. A faster, shallower rhythm. The kind the body produces when adrenaline has been building and is finally being allowed to rise. She could smell it, the specific chemical shift that happens when a person stops waiting and starts moving. He made a call from the far corner. Low voice cupped around the phone. She caught 3 words clearly. CO, the suite. 15 minutes. Enough. Lyric set the guitar on the table. She moved to the inner bedroom door and knocked. Twice, then once more, the signal she and Zoe had established without naming it aloud. Hey, baby. Go listen to your dinosaur playlist. Her voice was the same voice she used every bedtime. Unhurried, warm. Headphones in. Don't come out until I knock 3 times. Zoe appeared in the doorway. She looked at her aunt with the unblinking attention of a child who notices what adults assume they've concealed. She didn't ask questions. 3 times, she said. Okay, D-Lyric. The bedroom door closed. Thomas spoke first. You heard something. Not a question. He was already moving. She tracked him by the floor vibration, the displacement of air, the way the room's ambient sound shifted around a body in motion. Lyric stood. She set nothing down, picked nothing up. She simply rose and stood. 8 months? She said. You've been feeding SEO information. How long before that were you deciding to? The silence that followed was not the silence of someone caught off guard. It was the silence of someone recalculating. Tell me the encoding structure. He was close now. 8 feet, then 6. All 12 songs. How he built the sequences. My father's spent 9 years building that evidence. Her voice didn't change. So that one day someone could end CO with it. And I need it before Han gets back. Then you should have asked differently. She heard the silencer attachment coming out of his jacket pocket. Plastic on metal, threading onto the barrel. Still moving. 5 feet now. Thomas Reed reached for her shoulder. She didn't move back. This was what stopped him. Not her words, not her voice, but the fact that she hadn't moved at all. Every calculation he had made about this room and this woman was built on a premise her stillness now disproved. People who are afraid move backward. They flinch. They compress. They make themselves smaller. She was not smaller. My father knew this night would come, Lyric said. Half a register lower, not louder. He spent 3 years making sure I knew what to do when it did. Thomas's hand closed on her shoulder, his first mistake. She didn't resist the direction of his grip. She moved into it, rotating inward, using his pull as the lever. Her left forearm came against his wrist at the joint, sharp, precise, the way her father had drilled it in a garage in Queens on Saturday mornings for 3 years, until the movement lived in her muscle instead of her mind. The gun dropped. She heard it hit the carpet, to her left, 4 feet. Her knee went to the back of his knee. He went down. She crouched with him, controlled and pressed the rubber tip of her cane against the base of his throat. Her thumb found the recessed release on the grip. A short metallic snick. The titanium blade extended. She held it there, lightly, a statement, not a threat. I have carried proof of every crime he committed since then. A pause. Inside 12 songs, 6 nights a week, 18 years. Her voice dropped lower. I was never waiting to be rescued. I was waiting for the right moment. Thomas looked up at her from the floor, the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the foundation he built his plan on was never there. You picked the wrong side, Lyric said. The mahogany door opened. Han Song-jin walked in, jacket open, breathing harder than he allowed in front of anyone. Jason Park and 2 others came in behind him. They had recognized the trap on the bridge to Brooklyn and turned the car around before it finished the crossing. He stood in the doorway and took in the room. Thomas Reed on the floor. Lyric Washington standing over him, cane in hand, blade extended, breathing at the rate of someone who had just completed a task they had been preparing for a very long time. He's been feeding CO for 8 months. Her voice had returned to its regular register. Even informational, the same voice she used to list as set. The Brooklyn routes, the Jersey accounts, your schedule. It's all in his call logs, third contact, from the top. Jason moved to Thomas without being asked. He checked the phone. He looked at Jin. He nodded once. Jin looked at Thomas for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Lyric. He didn't speak. There was no sentence precise enough for what he was seeing. A woman standing in the wreckage of someone's betrayal with the same composure she had walked in with 2 days ago through the wrong door. As though none of this had changed anything fundamental about who she was. Because it hadn't. Because she had always been this. He had simply been the last to know. Han Song-jin had spent 14 years building a world that answered to him. He had never once considered that the most prepared person in it would be someone who couldn't see it. Standing in the doorway at 1:47 a.m., he understood something his father tried to tell him once in a conversation he hadn't fully heard at the time. The people we spend our lives protecting are usually protecting something we haven't thought to ask about. Jason took Thomas Reed out of the room without being asked. The penthouse fell quiet. Not the tense quiet of before. Something else. The quality of silence after a thing has been resolved and the air has not yet decided what to become. Jin sat down across from Lyric, not immediately. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the way you stand in a place when you're still adjusting to what it means now. Then he sat. She had retracted the blade. The cane rested across her knees. "Are you all right?" he said. It was the first time in 2 days that he had asked her a question without any other layer under it. "I'm fine." A pause. "Zoe's fine." He was quiet. "You knew. Before I left, you already knew Thomas was compromised." "I suspected." She set the cane beside her. "I needed him to confirm it himself. You used yourself as bait." "I used what I had." The room held that. Outside the glass, Manhattan continued at its usual pace. "Your father raised you for this." Not an accusation. An observation from somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. Not just the music, all of it. "He raised me to be someone who didn't need saving." A pause. "Even when he couldn't be there to see it. I spent 8 years thinking I was the one keeping you safe." "You were." Her voice was quiet. "And I was keeping something safe for you. We just didn't know about each other." Jin looked at her for a long moment in the low light of the penthouse. Manhattan filtering through the floor-to-ceiling glass behind her, the city doing what it always did, indifferent and magnificent. He had nothing left to say that was precise enough. The bedroom door opened. Zoe appeared, hair loose, eyes still soft with sleep, one hand gripping the door frame and the other holding a napkin pressed flat. She walked to Jin without greeting anyone and placed the napkin on the low table in front of him. He looked down, a pencil drawing, a man standing alone at a window. The city spread small below him. The lines were deliberate in the way children's drawings sometimes are when the child has been looking at something for a long time before putting it to paper. "I made this for you." Her voice carried the gravity of someone completing an important transaction. "So you have something to look at when you're lonely." A pause. "I think you're lonely a lot." Jin looked at the drawing. He was quiet long enough that Zoe shifted her weight slightly. Then he picked it up, folded it, carefully as though it were made of something fragile, and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He said nothing. Zoe nodded, satisfied the way someone nods when a task has been properly finished. She turned and went back to the bedroom. The door clicked shut. Lyric had not moved. Her hand rested over the guitar strings. Not playing, just there. She had heard every word. 6 months later. Thomas Reed entered a guilty plea at the Southern District Court of New York on March 17th. 31 counts, including conspiracy, and 8 months of documented intelligence transferred to CO's organization. Sentencing was scheduled for June. Victor CO's federal indictment followed 4 weeks later. 47 counts across 3 jurisdictions. The financial evidence was derived from 12 jazz compositions performed from memory over the course of a 4-hour and 17-minute session with a financial crimes task force by a witness whose name did not appear in any public record associated with the case. She had requested that. They had agreed. On a Friday in March, the Velvet Lounge filled the way it always did, gradually. The way a room fills when people come because they want to be there. Lyric had returned to her 6-night residency 5 weeks earlier. Same stage. Same room. She had navigated by sound for 6 years. She had changed the set list once. The Washington Suite was now the final hour of every Friday performance. All 12 pieces, in order, the way her father had written them. Not as evidence, not as obligation, as the letter they had always been. In the front row, Zoe sat with her feet not quite reaching the floor, sketchbook open across her knees. She wasn't drawing tonight. She was listening. At the table in the far corner, the darkest corner, the one nearest the rear exit, Han Song-jin sat alone. No Jason tonight on the table, one glass of barley tea still steaming. He hadn't ordered it. He had found it there when he arrived. When the 12th song ended and the applause rose, Lyric stood still on the stage for one full beat. Then she turned her head slightly toward the far corner. She couldn't see him. She smiled anyway. Small. Not for the room. Backstage, Zoe was asleep in the armchair, sketchbook across her knees, pencil still in her hand. Lyric sat beside her, the guitar across her own. She heard the footsteps in the corridor before the door opened. She had known their weight and rhythm for 6 months. Jin came in. He sat down. He didn't speak. She found the neck of the guitar by touch. She placed her fingers on the first fret. One note. The opening note of the Washington Suite. The one her father used to begin every session, the one he said meant pay attention to what comes next. She held it until the room had absorbed it and let it go. Jin reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed the folded napkin on the table between them. The drawing, still carrying the crease from 6 months of being kept there. Lyric couldn't see it. But she heard the soft sound of paper on wood, and she understood. She drew that in the penthouse, Lyric said. While you were at the window. Yes, she said you looked lonely. She was right. The silence that follows that kind of admission is its own thing. The kind no one reaches to fill because it is already holding something. Tell me something about your father, Jin said. Something no one else knew. That's a long story. I have time. Outside, a light rain had started, not the storm of the night they met, just the quiet kind, the kind that falls without urgency. Lyric set her hand flat against the guitar strings. He used to say, the note matters, but the silence after it matters more. She lifted her hand slowly. The last resonance faded into the room. That's where the listener decides what they just heard. Jin didn't answer immediately. He sat with it the way she had learned. He sat with everything that mattered to him. Outside, the rain fell. Inside, Zoe slept with the pencil still in her hand. Between them, the folded drawing stayed where he had placed it. If this story stayed with you, the drawing folded into a jacket pocket. The note. That means pay attention to what comes next, or the silence that neither of them reached to fill. Drop Washington Suite in the comments below. We want to know which moment landed hardest for you. Was it Zoe's question at the window? The one no adult in the room could answer? The 8 notes Lyric played to decode her father's evidence in real time? Jin's single word when Seo made his offer? Or the opening note at the end, the one that asked for nothing back? We're leaving you with one question, and we genuinely want to know your answer. If someone had been quietly protecting you from the shadows for years, would you want to know? Or would you rather have lived without knowing? Drop it in the comments. We read everyone. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. Share it with someone who understands that the strongest people in the room are often the ones no one thinks to ask about. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We'll see you there.